Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a quest, a journey into the most familiar and yet somehow the most mysterious place there is, our own minds. We're talking about introspection, right? That little voice in your head, that internal conversation you have to figure out who you are, what you're feeling, and why you do the things you do. It's a journey that has fascinated thinkers for literally centuries, and today, we're going to explore all of its twists and turns together. So let's get into it.
So, let me just ask you, straight up, how do you know what's going on in your head at this very moment? I mean, the answer seems almost ridiculously obvious, doesn't it? You just know. You just look inside and the answer's right there. But as we're about to find out, that simple, intuitive act of looking inward is one of the most complex and, honestly, one of the most fiercely debated topics in all of philosophy and psychology.
You know, every single day, we're basically the authors of our own story. We're constantly interpreting why we did something, justifying our feelings, and connecting the dots of our past to make sense of right now. This process of building a coherent personal narrative, well, it's something we all do, all the time. And it all relies on this fundamental ability to look inward. But what exactly are we looking at when we do that? And maybe the bigger question is, how reliable is that view really?
So, here's the game plan for this explainer. We'll start with the classic philosophical quest for self-knowledge, and then we'll try to pin down a clear definition for introspection. From there, we'll dive into the philosophical tug-of-war over how it all works, trace science's dramatic love-hate relationship with it, and, confront some pretty shocking evidence of just how wrong we can be. And then, we'll wrap it all up by discovering the true and maybe surprising value of reflection in our lives.
All right, let's kick things off at the very beginning with this grand quest for self-knowledge. Why has this inner gaze been seen as such a big deal for so long? Well, the answer is that for centuries, many brilliant minds believed it wasn't just about knowing yourself. They thought it was a foundational tool for all knowledge.
Thinkers like Descartes have argued that while you can doubt pretty much everything about the outside world, maybe it's all a dream, maybe we're in the Matrix, our knowledge of our own minds feels uniquely secure. It feels immediate. You can't really be wrong that you feel like you're happy, right? Even if the reason you think you're happy is totally off. This idea of privileged access, that you know your own thoughts and feelings in a way nobody else possibly can, makes introspection a cornerstone of epistemology, which is the study of knowledge itself. So yeah, this isn't just self-help stuff, it's a potential foundation for everything we claim to know.
Okay, but if we're going to get serious about this, we have to move beyond just vague ideas of looking inward. That's not going to cut it. So let's try to get really specific and pin down a clear definition for this inner gaze.
So here's our anchor point, a definition pulled from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Now notice the key parts here. It's a way of learning something. It's about your own mental states, your beliefs, your desires, your pains, your perceptions. It's about what's happening right now, or maybe just a moment ago. And most importantly, it's done in a way that is unique to you. No one else can do it for you.
What's really cool is how this breaks down into 3 essential rules. For something to actually count as introspection, it has to check all these boxes. First, the mentality condition. It has to be about your internal mental world. So, knowing you're feeling anxious, that's introspection. Knowing there's a cup on your desk, that's just perception. Second, the first-person condition. It's about your mind and only your mind. You can guess what your friend is thinking, but you can only introspect your own thoughts. And third, the temporal proximity condition. It's about the here and now. Introspecting your current state of confusion is totally different from just remembering that you were confused last Tuesday.
So, okay, we have a definition. You'd think that would settle things, right? Well, not even close. Even with these rules, philosophers have been locked in this fascinating tug-of-war for ages over the really big question: how does introspection actually work?
The whole debate really boils down to 2 beautifully simple but really powerful metaphors. Is introspection an inner sense, like an eyeball that's turned inward, just perceiving mental states that are already there, fully formed, waiting to be noticed? Or is it more of an outward gaze, where we learn about what we believe, not by looking in, but by looking out at the world itself?
And this just brilliantly lays out the main competing theories. You've got the self-detection view, which sees introspection as a kind of mind scanner, just passively reading what's there. Then there's the transparency view that says it's more like a window. To know if you believe it's raining, you just look out the window to see if it's raining. Simple. The self-fulfillment view suggests it's a self-writing story. The very act of thinking, I am thinking, makes it true. And finally, the Fury theory, which says we're all just detectives, inferring our own mental states from clues, kind of like we do for other people.
This classic quote from the philosopher Gareth Evans just perfectly captures that
outward gaze or transparency idea? He argues that to answer the question, do you think there will be a third world war, you don't scan your brain for a little file labeled belief. No, you look outward at the evidence, at the state of the world, and you form your answer based on that. Your knowledge of your own belief comes directly from your assessment of the world itself. It's a wild idea when you first hear it.
Now, this wasn't just some abstract debate for philosophers in an ivory tower. This whole tug-of-war had dramatic, real-world consequences, especially in the history of scientific psychology, which developed this really complicated love-hate relationship with introspection.
The story of introspection in science is a genuine roller coaster. I mean, back in the late 1800s, the very first psychology labs, run by pioneers like Wundt and Titchener, were built entirely around introspection. But this method got super controversial, and by the 1910s, behaviorism just revolted and threw introspection out completely. They said science can only study what you can see, behavior. The mind was just a black box. It wasn't until the cognitive revolution in the 60s that scientists started caring about internal processes again, and since the 90s, with things like fMRI and consciousness studies, introspection has made a major, if pretty cautious, comeback.
So why the huge backlash? Well, the behaviorists had three main beefs. First, it just seemed fundamentally unscientific. How can you build a real science on private feelings that nobody else can check? Second, these so-called experts in different labs couldn't even agree on basic things like whether you can have a thought without a mental picture. And third, there was the classic problem. How can the mind observe itself without changing the very thing it's looking at? The thinker can't be both the actor and the impartial audience at the same time.
So after all this back and forth, we have to ask the critical question. How much can we really trust our own inner eye? Modern science has put it to the test, and the evidence is, well, it might just shock you.
Let's just start with this number, 72%. In a famous experiment on something called choice blindness, researchers showed people two faces and asked which one they found more attractive. Then, using a little sleight of hand, they swapped the photos and handed the person the face they had rejected. A staggering 72% of people did not notice the switch. And get this, not only did they not notice, they went on to confidently explain why they had chosen the person they had, in fact, just rejected a moment before.
And that's just one of many stunning findings. In the classic stocking study, shoppers almost always preferred stockings on the right side of a display, but when asked why, nobody mentioned the position. Instead, they invented, the technical term is confabulated, reasons about the fabric softness or color. We see this even more dramatically in split-brain patients, where the verbal left side of the brain will create completely fabricated but plausible-sounding reasons for actions triggered by the nonverbal right side. So when we explain our choices, are we reporting a true inner process, or is our brain just acting like a press secretary, spinning a good story after the decision's already been made?
Now, after hearing about all these flaws and errors, it's really easy to feel a bit discouraged. You might be wondering, is introspection completely useless? Is it just a self-deception machine? But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. Let's explore its true and maybe even more powerful value. And this is the big transformative question. If our inner gaze isn't a perfect, flawless mirror for detecting some fixed, pre-existing self, then what is it for? Why do we spend so much time and energy looking inward if the view is so often distorted or just plain wrong? Well, the answer might require us to change our entire perspective on what the goal of self-reflection even is.
The answer might be in a radical reframing of the whole thing. Maybe the purpose of introspection isn't to detect a static self, but to actively shape the self we are becoming. Think about it. When I declare to myself, I am a brave person, I'm not just reporting on a pre-existing fact. I'm creating a commitment. I'm making a choice that reinforces that tendency for the future. This shifts introspection from a passive act of perception to an active, ongoing practice. Its goal isn't to find some ultimate, objective truth about yourself, but rather to consciously build meaning and to author your own narrative.
And this isn't just an abstract idea. It's something deeply practical. Think about practices like journaling. When you engage with prompts like these, you're not just passively observing your thoughts as they float by. You are actively engaging with them. You are examining the stories you tell yourself. You're identifying your core values through your experiences, and you're deciding which beliefs to challenge or reinforce. You are participating consciously in the construction of your own identity.
So, this is where we end up. Introspection isn't a flawed window into a fixed soul. It's more like a pen and paper. It's flawed, it's messy, and yeah, it sometimes tells us stories that aren't quite true. But it's also the most powerful tool we have for authorship of our own lives. The final question, then, isn't just the ancient "who am I?", but maybe the more active, more urgent question, who do I choose to become? If knowing yourself is a creative act, what story will you choose to write?